Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Mark Steiner. Great to have you all with us. The largest oil refinery in the world was hit by a drone in Saudi Arabia and will send oil prices soaring. That much we know. The Trump administration would have us believe that the strike against the oil refinery came from Iran itself. The Saudis say that Iran was behind it. It was their weaponry. The Houthis fighting a civil war in Yemen said they're the ones that launched the drone in response to that war. And if they did, and even if Iran supplied the weaponry, we must remember what Saudi Arabia has done to Yemen. 14 million people, half the population, on the verge of starvation. They have bombed that nation over 18,000 times, targeting many civilians. So maybe they did hit the oil fields. But Trump is saying that the U.S. is locked and loaded. Pompeo says he has proof Iranians launched it. Do we believe them? More importantly, what are we stumbling into? Will there be war? And are we about to start another war over oil? We are joined by Asad Abukhalil, who is professor of political science at California State University Stanislaus and the author of The Battle for Saudi Arabia, and he maintains a blog, The Angry Arab News Service. And Asad, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Before we start with this kind of quote, the most recent quote that came out of Trump just moments before we began this interview today, give me your assessment of what we're watching here.
Well, I think we're watching the consequences of declarations of war. The United States, in effect, declared war on Iran. It's not that the United States decided to violate an international agreement, which is binding by virtue of its endorsement by the Security Council. The United States decided to violate international law by imposing sanctions illegal against Iran. And Iran felt that in response to this declaration of war, it wanted to retaliate against its coalition that is arrayed against it. On the other hand, Saudi Arabia has also declared war on the entire region. Saudi Arabia has imposed a dictatorship in Egypt against the will of the Egyptian people. Its ally UAE is fighting the war in Libya with the support of the United States and the Europeans. And in Yemen, it has, as you said, imposed an inhumane war on the population of one of the poorest countries of the world, of Yemen. And last year, it kidnapped the Lebanese prime minister, ordered him to be beaten and humiliated, and forced him to read a resignation letter. And of course, we mentioned the story of the assassination and the murder of a Saudi journalist. This is the reality of the region. And I think that what is happening is that there is a changing structure of Iranian decision-making. You see, much of the conventional wisdom in American media is about the hardliners versus the moderates in Iran and so on. What American declaration war on Iran has done is something unprecedented. It unified the ranks of the hardliners and the so-called moderates. And it also basically rallied the country against what they saw as a very unjust declaration of war against Iran, which, by all accounts, has been adhering to the terms of the international agreement regarding nuclear weapons. But we also have to remember that the oil interests of Saudi Arabia are of vital importance to the United States. Now, it has nothing to do with how much oil we get and so on, because Trump said we don't need Middle Eastern oil, which is true. America now is the largest producer of oil in the world at 16% of oil production versus Saudi Arabia, the second largest at something like 13% and so on, and Russia is third. But the United States needs Saudi oil because the Saudi royal family is so obedient to the U.S. diktats that it will regulate oil pricing by virtue of how much it produces, either more or less, depending what the orders are at the moment from the United States. The United States is committed since the 1970s to taking over the oil fields by force if they are ever threatened. I mean, we know from the 1970s that the United States has military contingency plan to take over. Happening now, there's a disruption in oil production, which is highly important to the United States and its economy. And for that reason, it feels compelled to act. The Iranians, however, we don't know who's behind these attacks, but let us say the Iranians. The Iranians are making it very clear to America's clients in the region that if there is going to be an escalation of war, and the fact that there is these stiff sanctions imposed on Iran, the Iranians want to say, we are not going to go down suffering by ourselves, and they want to extend that to the region, especially that the war in Yemen is also continuing. Saudi Arabia and its sponsors have given more reasons to people in the region who are not aligned with Saudi Arabia to basically escalate against Saudi government for the havoc it's causing throughout the region.
So So if you let me just play this quick clip here. This is what Trump said just before we started this interview, and I'm going to talk about this in the context of that for a moment.
President, do you want war with Iran?
Do I want war? I don't want war with anybody. I'm somebody that would like not to have war. We have the strongest military in the world. We want to find definitively who did this. We're dealing with Saudi Arabia. We're dealing with the Crown Prince and so many other of your neighbors. And we're all talking about it together. We'll see what happens. As you know, there are ways to see definitively where they came from, and we have all of those ways, and that's being checked out right now. And we'll be able to find that out, figure that out very quickly. We pretty much already know.
I mean, so that's clearly Trump just blathering on about that. But the question becomes to me, I mean, what could be in store here? I mean, let's take another look at something else. This is interesting to juxtapose these. This is the leader of Iran, Rouhani, speaking. We have a translation, and you'll hear it, and all of you will hear it. And let's talk about how you juxtapose these two things.
Americans, instead of confessing that their presence in the region, in Syria, in Yemen, and other areas has been problematic, they accuse the countries of the region.
So if the Houthis are the ones who launched the drones, and Iran is backing the Houthis, I mean, and in these kind of crazy regional war, the United States clearly backing Saudi Arabia, that is destroying Yemen and killing numerous people, thousands of people in Yemen. So let's say all that was true. So where does this take the war? What do we say to both the American people and the world at this moment about what we're witnessing and what this really means?
It depends what the United States will do, of course. And I think that we have seen that the bombastic rhetoric of Trump in the beginning of the first years of his administration have lessened a bit. I mean, I think that there is the law of diminishing returns applied to the threats that Trump has made. I mean, he made them against Iran, he made them against North Korea. But if you make these threats that are not matched by actual military action, they lose much of its power and they are less intimidating. And that's true about these recent tweets. However, I think Trump is becoming aware that dealing with Iran is not the same as dealing with North Korea. Iran feels that it is being unfairly targeted by the United States and its allies in the region by these stiff economic sanctions, which cause suffering for the average Iranians. It's not the government that's going to suffer. And for that reason, they feel they are being pushed against the wall. And in response to that, they may be resorting to military action, assuming they were behind the attack on the ships in the Gulf and the recent attack on the oil fields. And we don't even know whether these were drones or cruise missiles and what type of weaponry were used. There's very little information. I mean, of course, we are talking about the Saudi royal family, the least transparent government on the face of the earth. So we have to take everything they say with more than a grain of salt. They will only say things that will be incriminating to Iran because they would like nothing more than to have the United States fight on its behalf and die on its behalf. America, however, I think under Trump, I mean, I would say Trump seems more reluctant to go to war than his predecessors, Obama or Bush. And it is for that reason, this could be preparing or paving the way for the beginning of direct or indirect negotiations between Iran and the United States. I do not rule that out at all. Having said that, let us not forget about the role of Israel. Israel is perhaps the number one before Saudi Arabia that has been lobbying for many years for the United States to fight on its behalf. And Israel always wanted the United States to fight and die on its behalf. And the Bush administration ruled it out. They didn't want to go to war against Iran. And the Obama administration, the same thing. But the thing is, the United States have done so much on behalf of Israel against Iran, from sabotage to supporting terrorist attacks, even the Mujahidi Khalq, this terrorist organization that is responsible for car bombs against Iran and so on. But short of actual declaration of war. The Iranians, however, say that we have been at war. The United States have inflicted war on Iran, and perhaps this is part of their responses. I'm not sure.
And there was an interesting response from the Houthis themselves. I don't know if you saw that today, but I'd like to show this to our viewers. And one of the Houthi spokesmen clearly saying that we did this.
We exploited vulnerabilities in the Saudi defense system, and we built our drones in order to avoid these systems. Therefore, the Saudi and Emirati airspace became open to us after their defense systems failed to even spot the drones.
You know, but for people in this country, especially in this country, the United States, who are watching this and watching this kind of fallout and seeing what happens. I mean, I think people care less in this country about how the drone hit, but the fact that it hit and what this means for our future and the future of the planet. I mean, Bill McKibben came out today, 350.org, saying we are about to, half of our wars have been started around oil in the last 20-odd years. And so could we be seeing another one? You're suggesting we may not be seeing another war, but another way to control the oil and pushing around for negotiations. I mean, but many people are saying the opposite, saying we are seeing this is a push incrementally into war that we can't avoid.
I also want to point out a very curious tweet that was issued by the former Senator Corker, who was formerly Senate Foreign Relations Committee chair,
right,
in which he said that he found the timing of this attack very curious, thereby leaving the impression that it could be enemies of Iran who may be behind it in order to drag the United States into a war in the region. I'm not sure if that's going to work or not, however. I feel that Trump has become more cautious in his rhetoric about Iran than when he first started. I don't want to underestimate the significance of what happened today. The attack on Saudi Arabia like that exposed the vulnerabilities of oil production facilities in Saudi Arabia. And the fact that Saudi Arabia, despite all the exorbitant expenditure on arms import, largely from the United States, to the tune of Saudi Arabia becoming the third largest responsible for spending on arms in the world after China and the United States, despite all their expenditure, they are incapable of protecting their oil installation, thereby causing disruption in more than 50% of their oil production per day. I mean, that is significant. And if Iran is behind it, or even if the Houthis, they want the Saudis to pay a price in order either, if the Yemenis are behind it, to stop that war on Yemen, or if Iran is behind it, to tell them that if there is going to be war against Iran, you will not be left out of it. You will not be watching it on your TV screen. You will be in the middle of it. And I think for the last 2 months, I can say, judging the rhetoric of UAE and Saudi Arabia, that to a large extent has worked. Suddenly, UAE sent a messenger to the Iranian government, talking to them directly for the first time in a long time. The UAE announced a unilateral decision to withdraw their troops from Yemen. So if that was part of the Iranian strategy, it has borne fruits for them.
And so, again, let's just conclude, Assad, just what this could lead to. I was really interested in what you're saying about forcing the negotiations with Iran, which, of course, going back and forth with Trump's not remembering what he actually said or not wanting to remember what he said. But I could see this in some senses when you look at the volatility of the situation that is taking place, and with the Houthi push in Yemen, and that we could stumble into a war, even if it wasn't meant to be, very easily.
Right. I mean, that's true. We could stumble into a war. However, I feel most of the parties concerned, with the very exception of the State of Israel, do not want to get to war. The UAE and Saudi Arabia now are fully aware a war will not spare them, that rockets will be falling on their major cities and oil installations. The United States government does not seem to want war. I mean, at least under this president, who is so focused on the issues of immigration and the economy. And he knows an oil over there is going to mean tremendous boost in oil prices, a disruption of his economic plans, and so on, which would affect his re-election fortunes. So Israel, however, feel that they can just watch whatever happens, even if the Arabs or the Americans would suffer. And also America is vulnerable by virtue of its small-scale presence, occupation, call it, in in Iraq and in Afghanistan and in Syria. And if there is a war, those troops, 2,000 in Syria, 5,000 in Iraq, and 14,000 in Afghanistan, will be vulnerable, and the other side will feel they can attack them.
Well, Dr. Assad Abukhalil, first I want to thank you for your very concise and interesting analysis. This has been fascinating. Appreciate you taking your time with us today here at The Real News. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I'm Mark Steiner here for The Real News Network. Thank you for joining us. Let us know what you think. Take care.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.